They are the directors of the upcoming documentary, Kevin Garnett, Anything is Possible on Showtime. It premieres November 12th. We welcome Dan Levin and Eric Newman onto Hoopsology. How's it going, guys?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Great, Justin. Thanks, man.
Sure. I appreciate you guys coming on here, and I've been really looking forward to this chat. And I'm excited about this Kevin Garnett documentary. And, Kevin Garnett's, I think, is not the most friendliest guy, at least to just fans from the outset. So can you kind of go over just the origin of how this project came together, and really how was it like working with him, and what was kind of the vision going into getting this documentary into fruition?
Sure. I'll get us started.
Sure.
So, Dan and I go back, 10 years, and we met. His father Mark is the EP of this film, and they're a father-son filmmaking duo. So I met them both 10 years ago when I was shifting my career focus from basketball and doing creative on the side to really taking on producing and really trying to get in the lane to become one day a filmmaker. And created a great bond with them. Got to work on a really exciting documentary about Lloyd Daniels back in the day, and that kind of started our bond. And as you can tell from my hat and the shade of green I chose today, I'm a lifelong Celtics fan. So watching KG with the Celtics, I always thought if I ever can become a filmmaker, who better of a subject could I one day tell the story of? And spoken into existence. But Dan and I, for years, trying to figure out, how do we collab, how do we grow? He's on his journey, I'm on my journey, and the timing got right where Mark Levin got introduced to KG and his team. I was working on the Resurgence to Marcus Cousins documentary, elevating my work with Showtime. Dan was on his way as a filmmaker. And then from there, and I'll let Dan chime in from there, we started to go to work on like what the creative vision for this could be, and how special of a story.
Yeah, I mean, as Eric said, we've been working together, friends for a long time. Obviously, film and basketball is a common love and hobby and profession for both of us. And I say, KG, yeah, I mean, he knew of Blowback Productions, he knew of our work, and I think the conversations just started that he was starting a production company, Content Cartel, and we were aligned with some of the people he was working with in LA, and we had a lot of common friends, and he had a lot of documentary ideas that he wanted to pursue. And, me and Eric were like, I mean, you haven't even told your story, why don't we start there? And I think everybody collectively was like, yeah, I mean, your story is so profound and dynamic, let's start there. And he sort of, that wasn't the initial way we all got together, but I think we sort of had to sell him on him telling his story. And then we, brought it to Showtime, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And Justin, let me just say, like, there's a big difference between the Kevin Garnett that millions of people watched for 2 hours a night as an NBA player versus Kevin Garnett, the human being, whether it was then or today. Like, these are completely different versions of himself. And Dan and I have been blessed to work on exciting projects with talented people in multiple lanes, not just basketball, not just sports. And, it's funny, like, I'll get a chuckle out of this. Like, I've lost count of how many guys I've been able to interview and sit down with. And there's nothing like sitting down with Kevin, because aside from just his passion and his energy, like, he comes prepared. He comes ready to work. He's not in there saying, all right, how long is this going to take? Get me out of here in an hour. Like, we're doing 4-hour, 5-hour marathon interviews, stuff in the field. Like, he's all about this. And as Dan said, he's been building the groundwork for his production company. And we're building this beautiful partnership both between Blowback Productions, which is the production company that, Dan and his dad have been working on together for so long, along with what we're doing at Showtime and Showtime Basketball, which is, the side that I'm on frequently across digital and all the smoke and everything else. So it was this beautiful convergence. But Dan, if you remember, like, the initial thing that they were laying out was, it was all about like what happened after KG came into the league. And he didn't even want to talk about himself. He wanted to talk about all these things that were the result of the domino effect that he started. And we're like, okay, well, that makes perfect sense. but we've got to weave your story in because there's too much to leave out. And he's very, very, very humble. He's very confident in himself when it came to hoop and being that guy, but he's very humble. And we got him to that point where we worked out that perfect balance in the creative. And, we can talk more about the process of making the film and the journey and doing it under wild circumstances where our entire world changed. But he's incredible to work with in every regard.
Yeah. And I would just add one more thing to that.
Yeah, of course.
I think one of the initial sparks, obviously, when you meet him, I mean, he's such an amazing storyteller. You sit down in a room with him and he can tell stories. He can remember instances from his high school, from his childhood. He can remember being on the floor with Kobe and whoever, and it just comes back to him. And the way he tells a story, you're just enthralled. And we were just like watching him tell stories and we were like, this is amazing. I could watch this for hours. And we would sit with him for hours and he'd tell us stories about his whole life and his whole career. And we were like, if we can capture this on screen, it's going to be wild. And sort of that was the initial goal, was just to get him telling his story.
The teaser trailer that you guys released, this featured kind of KG in that one shot. And just his intensity is something that I don't think has been replicated in the league. I mean, people speak about Kobe Bryant's intensity, but I don't think that matches Kevin Garnett's in terms of just how fierce of a competitor that he was on the court. Can you guys go into the origin of that and just where that comes from? Because I don't think pretty much in the history of the NBA, I can't think of anybody that kind of replicated that, we haven't seen that since. We haven't seen that really before KG. So did he really go into where does that mentality, that intensity comes from?
I think it's safe to say we know a lot about where that comes from. So some of it we can share.
Sure.
Some things that he shared with us that, are just for us and not for the film. But, if you know Kevin Garnett's story, you know that, he's from South Carolina and he then spent his senior year of high school in Chicago. So we don't want to give too much away from the film, but to go from a country kid from the South as a teen to a place like Chicago in the mid 90s and be at a place like Farragut, not the easiest adjustment. And it really was for him at many times. And Dan, please expand on this. But for him, it was survival mode and learning how to navigate the day to day in a urban environment like that for many, especially on the west side of Chicago, can be very dangerous. So when he got to Chicago, between his coach and his All-American teammate, Ronnie Fields, who many will remember from back in the day, it was the ideal fit. And one of the things that was driving him was what he had experienced in South Carolina, and knowing that how he performs and what happens this senior year in Farragut is going to determine the future of his life. And that passion, that intensity, knowing everything's on the line, that has a lot to do with the foundation of that.
Yeah, and I mean, well said. And I think,
Dan, did I miss anything?
No, I think one of the through lines of our film, which you'll have to watch, is to try to find out where that intensity comes from and, the source of it. And it shifts over time. But I think a lot of the core of it is him, trying to prove everybody that said he couldn't do this or couldn't do this, that, or be this or be that, or, couldn't pass this test, couldn't get these grades, you can't go straight from high school. Everybody that was telling him he couldn't do something, he wanted to prove them all wrong. And I think that sort of just became a rolling stone that just snowballed, and it sort of just propelled him throughout his whole career.
What was the filmmaking process like? You said you were making this film during kind of the pandemic and just COVID. What were the barriers that you had to encounter just to make this film possible?
Well, we started with one plan, and we started principal photography, and our shoot days started in January of 2020. So, Justin, to give you an idea of how crazy this was, our first two shoot days were January 24th and 25th, 2020 in Los Angeles, Friday, Saturday. we know what Sunday, January 26th was. That was the day that nothing's felt right since. I've had a few days that have felt normal, but nothing's really felt right since. So it was pretty crazy. Dan and I filming together, and we're in the studio, and then Saturday we're in Malibu on the beach filming this beautiful stuff with KG, literally 10 miles from where the unfortunate tragedy happened the next day. And we thankfully had a great shoot in Chicago around All-Star in February, when everybody saw him out there with the Hall of Fame and the finalist announcement, and there's all the smoke appearance, and we went with him to Farragut, which was just a thrilling day, him returning there. And then after that, the whole world shut down and changed. So Dan and I really had to think about how do we stay on course but reconfigure the plan as we go, because we had hopes to do all of these scenes with Kevin and Kobe, and Kevin and Isaiah Thomas, and Kevin and Doc, and Kevin and Paul Pierce. So we had to recalibrate a lot of that strategy. And thankfully, as Dan, please expand on this, we were still able to put together just a beautiful chorus of voices, both doing strategic in-persons and then also a bunch of really good remote interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Eric said, it's sort of amazing that we got to start the film pre-COVID, and, getting to share that experience with Kevin, not only in LA, but also in Chicago, sort of being with him in these different locations and really just following him, Doc Verite style, which was sort of an introduction to how our relationship with him in the film mode and just sort of being together. So it was great to have that in the can, at least initially. And then the world shut down, COVID hit, and we had to figure out how to, like all productions did, how to, slowly come back up in COVID, figured out how to do it safely. We luckily had a wealth of material that we could start editing. So we sort of started editing while the world was shut down, and we started piecing it all together and started really coming in, into focus what key characters, key voices that were missing and that we had to get next to sort of keep completing the film. So it was almost like a puzzle that, we had to just keep pulling together, which, I mean, films, they never feel finished. So you're always doing it till the end. And there's still interviews that I wish we got, and scenes that I wish we got.
I'm still texting Dan every other day. Can we get one more interview? But
at some point you got to stop and say it's done. So, but no, it was a wild experience. I mean, not only for us, for all of film production, and we did do in-person interviews, with testing, and we did remote interviews where we were basically interviewing over Zoom, and so it became a combination of both, which was a new territory for us and everybody.
How was that process for you in terms of doing interviews over Zoom? For actually a featured documentary, what were kind of were there any kind of snags or difficulties with that, or did you kind of adjust on the fly? How was that adjustment for you?
Well, I think the biggest thing, I mean, luckily, we worked with a lot of local regional talent that was, wherever an interview subject was, we would get a camera person to sort of bring a camera package and set up and shoot the interview. So it was shot and lit nicely, and then we would remote in. And I think, the hardest thing about that is just, I mean, as we are here, not being in the same physical space as someone when you're talking to them, when you're interviewing them, there is sort of a digital divide, and to sort of build up that rapport and get a comfortability going and just to get the conversation going, I think is harder that way. But, ultimately we figured it out, and now it's just commonplace to sort of do it.
Yeah, we were really fortunate, Justin, with, so many of our subjects, it goes without saying, right? So many of our subjects, they care so much about Kevin, and they want to be part of his story, and they're so passionate about it. So whatever the process was of getting it done, like, they were going to get it done with us, and then from then, like, I talked to Sam Mitchell today. Like, I still haven't met Sam in person, but I interviewed him remotely, and we had so many animated conversations leading up to it and since then. And he had me on his radio show when we were originally going to try to get this out during the summer, and we've just built this great bond from afar. So we've been best case scenario with, like, what we got remote. We got Celtics media remote. We got Danny Ainge remote. We we got a lot of people remote where, and Dan has lived this too, whether you're doing verite scenes, obviously you're in the room, whether you're conducting interviews, like I made my way doing like really deep athlete slash media interviews. And the key is being there together and
Yeah.
being in that moment. And we were very fortunate that we really didn't come away from really any remotes feeling like, oh, that would have been so much better in person. Like we really got what we needed from almost all of them. So we're very fortunate in that regard.